let me know when you're going. Okay, so after bulk, we can start doing pizza if we want. And in order to do that, you get as many containers as you need to divide your bulk and throw them into separate bins. So I've already oiled this. You can use avocado oil, olive oil, whatever oil you like. Maybe a heavy tablespoon of that. Wipe it around with your hands just so it doesn't stick when you put the dough in there, because we're going to be putting these in the fridge until it's time to make the pizza. It can sit in the fridge as just dough for up to a week, because we're not worried about it rising as much as with a loaf. It's going to be sort of flat and it'll still rise even if it's older. And in fact, the longer you let the dough sit in the fridge, the more extensible it is. So it'll actually be easier to shape if you let it sit for a day or two. So I've already started to divide this this bulk fermented sourdough. I'm going to split it again just because the amount that I make kind of works well for three little pizzas. They actually end up being large pizzas, but I want to shape these into boules. So I'll kind of tuck those under and get some oil from the bowls to make it easier to handle the dough. And I'm just kind of creating these rounds. With my drywall knife. So I've got the three, kind of how I like them. And if any seem to be bigger or smaller, you can adjust by just chopping a little bit off of one. So this one looks to be a little bit smaller than this one. I'll go underneath, just chop off a bit of it, tuck it under that one, and over the course of this sitting in the fridge, that'll all just heal together, and it'll make for pizzas that are more or less the same size. Doesn't have to be exact, but you like to get them pretty close. So once those are the size you like, we're not going to invert them this time, just because I like to have a surface, a smooth surface, to stretch out when I shape the pizzas later. So what I do is I get a little bit of oil on my hands to make it easier to handle them. And I actually take the rough side. So there's kind of a nice side and then there's a rough side underneath. So the way I did that was kind of rolled it into my hand. And I want that rough side to stay against the bottom of the bin, because later that skin is going to be easier to shape if I flip that onto the wax paper later when I'm making pizzas. So let's do that for all of them. Oh, it's a little bit stuck to the counter. And then you can cover them with by putting them in bags the same way you would for bread. Or if you've got big enough containers, you just put the lids on. And you want to make sure that there's a little bit of room for these to rise, because they will still rise a bit in the fridge. So stack them up. We'll put them in the fridge, and then we can take these out tomorrow or a week from now. It's going to take a while to get these in the fridge, but the next video you'll see me taking them out and shaping the pizzas. Okay, it's been about 24 hours. The pizza dough has come out of the fridge. It's risen a little bit, and it's nice and slippery around in there because we've done a good job of oiling those bowls. So I've got 3 sheets of parchment paper. I said wax paper in the last video. It's definitely just parchment paper, so we're not using wax paper. I always confuse those two terms. So if I ever say wax paper, I mean parchment paper. And how we're going to get the dough onto the parchment paper is we want the oily, slippery side to be in contact with the parchment paper. It'll help us shape it. So what I do is get my hand nice and oily. These bowls have oil in them, or you can get a little oil, wipe it on your hands, flip the dough onto your hand like that. Won't stick because you have oil on your hand. And now, oil side down on the parchment paper. And that makes it really easy to shape because we can just slide it and stretch it like that. So I'm kind of reaching underneath and drawing the dough out toward the sides. You can pick it up and try to flip it around in the air if you want to be fancy. I just find that I have less control over the thickness or thinness of the dough when I do it that way. Because, you know, the dough is full of bubbles. Some parts are thicker than others. This part's way thicker than over here. If I'm spinning it, I have less control over where that thin part is, and I've ripped dough in the past. Not very fun. This way I can reach under the thick spot and stretch it out and really create a nice uniform piece of shaped pizza dough to work with. So right over here I can see that it's getting really thin. I can almost see through the crust, or I guess it's not crust yet because we haven't cooked it, but I can almost see through the dough. And over here I can see that it's a little bit thick. I can feel that it's thick, so I'll reach under there, grab the thick part, stretch it out. I'm just going to continue to work my way out. You don't have to worry about the crust staying thick. It's going to bubble up like crazy. So you can have the whole thing the same sort of flatness, and if you don't put toppings on an area of crust, it'll puff up. If you want a really thick crust, I'm talking like, you know, the size of your wrist, then yeah, let the crust stay thick. But this will rise like crazy, so you can stretch it out almost as flat as you like, and it's still going to rise a lot. What I like to do is shape it out to the size of my baking plate. So obviously your maximum dimensions are constrained by the pizza stone that you're going to be baking these on, or your cookie sheet, or whatever it is that you'll be doing your baking on. I have a 45-pound cast iron weightlifting plate preheating on the barbecue. So that thing stays on the barbecue, max burners, and the plate itself can get above 400 degrees Fahrenheit. So when I put these pizzas on, parchment paper and all, they really rise up aggressively because there's all that heat contained in that cast iron, because it's a thick piece of iron, and it really creates a really nice crisp crust, and it generates a lot of rise on the pizza even though I'm stretching it out, right? I've also seen people sort of push the pizza dough out to get it to be the right shape. So you just do what works for you, figure out what you like. I tend to like this method. I'm sure you'll figure out something that works well for you. And I mean, there's no wrong way to do it, just as long as you're not ripping the dough, and you want to preserve, or at least I like to preserve, these air bubbles, because it just kind of makes for a more fun eating experience to have like an airier sort of dough, or at least that's what I find. You might want to push them down, I don't know. You can kind of experiment and see what you like. So after I have topped this with my tomato sauce, cheese, and whatever other toppings I put on, I've got a pizza peel. I'll pick that up and I'll slide it onto my barbecue with the parchment paper and all. Close the barbecue, maybe about 10 minutes. You want to check under the crust with a spatula or something to see if it's golden brown. I like to turn it 180 degrees while it's on the barbecue because my barbecue cooks hotter at the back, so turning it after about 4 or 5 minutes will get the bottom nice and crispy underneath pretty uniformly. And then I pull it out, and because my barbecue doesn't quite get hot enough on top to really get the toppings nice and cooked, I'll also throw it in the oven on broil, and that'll get the top as crispy as I want. That only takes like a minute because I do it at the top rack. So be really careful in that last stage of broiling. You don't want to light your toppings on fire or burn them. I've lit the parchment paper on fire doing that, so I often just put in the pizza at that point, not with the parchment paper. And that's it. It's going to be some delicious pizza. I hope you the best. Throw some comments down below if you are struggling, have any questions, or if I've missed anything. And thanks for watching the pizza tutorial.
That was a good one.